So what I got here is a 1936 Buick Model 60 Century. And I realize this is not the best way to show it off, but my garage is small and sad. So it is what it is. The story behind the Model 60 and where it came from is actually kind of interesting. Buick had a Model 40, which was their small car for their entry-level customer. And then they had the Model 80 and 90, which was the Roadmaster, the big car, and the 90 was the limousine, also known as the Limited. What Buick did is they wanted a performance car, and they were kind of the first car in General Motors to do this. They took the body from the 40 series and the motor from the 80 series and created the 60 series. Now, to do that, they had to lengthen the front end of the car by 6 inches to get this motor in because it's 4 inches longer than the motor that was in the Special. This engine is a 320 cubic inch, 120 horsepower, and 235-ish foot-pounds of torque when it was shiny and new. The motor that was in the Special was 233 cubic inch. I'm not sure what the horsepower and torque ratings were, but obviously it was less. The reason Buick called this car the Century was because it was the first Buick that could sustain 100 miles an hour. Now, that sounds terrifying to me, just knowing how the brakes work and the suspension and stuff. I have read that these cars were great in a straight line, but they wouldn't stop, and they handled like a clown car when you tried to go around a corner. This one is special to me because it was my grandfather's. He bought it back in 1964, hauled it out of a barn, and the story goes that on the way home, dragging it with the truck, the doors fell off because the wooden structure inside the cab was so rotten that they wouldn't stay on. They had to use rope to tie the doors on to get it home. He got it home, cleaned it up, got it running after it had been sitting for a long time, rebuilt the structure of the cab, and drove it. He never did anything to it to make it shiny or pretty other than he put a paintbrush paint job on it. This car never saw a car show. It was just for his personal enjoyment, and he used it as a car off and on. Most of the time it was parked. So when he passed away, the car went to my father, who bought it from my grandmother. My father had it towed to his house, put it in his garage, and never touched it. It just sat till my father passed away, and I ended up buying it out of his estate. The car had not run since the mid-90s. I had to put a lot of time and money and more than a few swear words into getting it running, and it will run and drive now. But it still needs a lot of work. I've only put about 300 miles on it. The course of going through this thing and getting it running and driving, I've come across a lot of really interesting, to me anyway, Depression-era repairs that were done to this car. Because it went through World War II. And obviously it sold during the Depression. People didn't have a lot of money to maintain these things. So you did whatever you had to do to keep your car running. You couldn't run to the equivalent of Napa or the Sears catalog and buy a new carburetor or a new intake if you needed one. You just fixed what you had. It still has some stuff going back to its World War II times, the World War II time period. I had to replace it because the old one was all, faded away. But this is a World War II gasoline ration sticker. You see these on cars at car shows sometimes. Usually it's the letter A. A was like a private individual. B stood for a business owner. So a business owner got a little more gasoline and more frequent tires because it was seen that they needed to keep their business running for the war effort. So talking about those Depression-era repairs, I had to pull off the exhaust and intake manifold because I had massive exhaust leaks and vacuum leaks, and it smelled so bad my wife wouldn't even ride in it. So what I found was these straight eights, they have a 4-piece exhaust manifold, a front, an intermediate, a rear, and then like an interface that connects the manifold to the pipe and also connects it to the intake manifold. And what that does is it allows those exhaust gases to flow up out of here through this passage and actually heat up the intake manifold to help with atomization of the fuel, which, in modern times we go out of our way to cool exhaust manifolds. So it's kind of the opposite. But anyway, and there was a flapper in here that would manage that transfer. As it warmed up, there was a bimetallic strip over here that would close it, and then the exhaust would just go overboard out the exhaust system. Well, what I found was of the 4 parts, 3 were broken. The front manifold had a depression era repair where this ear broke off, and they just put a bolt in it like you do. And it had some, like JB Weld, whatever it was, the equivalent there was. The intermediate section was shattered. Tabs were broke off. Both these slip joints were shattered. I could have rebuilt it, but it would have been a ton of work, and then it would have been suspect. I'd probably be back in there a year from now doing it again. So what it had, though, when it was together, was this slip joint, both sides. They had taken the broken pieces, put them on here, JB welded them, and then put hose clamps around it. This thing had like 10 or 12 hose clamps on it for both sides. So I decided to replace these 2. You can still get these parts. Because luckily for me, they made this motor from 1936 until 1953. Essentially, the core motor was the same. They did increase in horsepower and performance over the years, but the parts that bolt on are pretty much the same. I was able to find a new to me, front manifold off a later model car. I think this was a 40s. This stuff ain't cheap though. This was $400. And to be honest with you, I was happy to find it at that price because a new casting is like $475. They know you need it, and they price up. They put a premium on it. This intermediate section, I couldn't find a used one that wasn't blown up, so I ended up buying a new one off eBay. Again, it was $575, but I need it. It's off a later model car. It has this ear. I assume it goes to the automatic choke, but it shouldn't be a problem for me. And if it does turn out to be in the way, I'll just machine it off. I am able to reuse the rear section of the old manifold. That's still good enough. I'm just going to get these slip joints cleaned up, get them put back together, put some sealant in there that can deal with temperature but won't restrict them in movement because the engine's so long it grows when it heats up. Intake manifold's in good shape, just needs to be cleaned up. Painted hunter green, put back on. Finally got the carburetor behaved. This carburetor is actually off a later car. I'm guessing mid-40s. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, and I usually am wrong. So it's a Stromberg, but it fits the manifold and it works good. It's got similar CFM characteristics. I did put a manual choke on it just to simplify things. Until I get the car running good, then I'll work on an automatic choke. Waiting on a stud kit to come in to reinstall the manifold. Plus, I got a couple broken studs in the head I got to pull out. But I got the kit to put that plenum back together, new exhaust manifold gaskets, stuff like that. But that's not the interesting part. What's really interesting, going back to those Depression era repairs, was I had always known that this car had a cracked block and that it had been repaired. But I had never seen it. You couldn't actually see it. And it was under the intake and exhaust manifold. So when I had to pull this off to repair it, I was able to see that repair. And what I found surprised me. I had no idea the scope of the repair. I don't know what the crack looks like underneath there, and I don't want to know. I'm not touching that thing. What that is a piece of rubber sandwiched between the block and a piece of copper. And a whole bunch of 1/4 bolts have been drilled and tapped into the block and head, that's actually right along the seam where the head gasket lives and stuff, to repair that crack. And it still holds water to this day. You could pressurize a cooling system and it doesn't leak. The car doesn't overheat. So I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to clean it up, paint the motor, the hunter green it's supposed to be, and put it back together. I kind of like this stuff. It's my grandfather. It's a bit of his heritage. I know he's the one who did it. What got the car parked in the first place back in the, in the 50s was the block cracked. It froze. So when he hauled it home, he fixed it. And that's the Depression era mindset. He never went to the parts store to buy anything. I can remember him and my dad out there and me helping, breaking down tires, using a truck and 2 pry bars to get tires, move tires from one rim to another, because I didn't want to spend the $2 to go to the gas station and have it done. So this is kind of neat, kind of a memento of him, and a throwback to how people used to do things. You know, nowadays it's just you run to Napa and I need a new alternator, I need a new this, I need a block. You know, if you were to do this on a modern car and post it on a forum, people would be horrified. You know, this is kind of neat. So as long as it doesn't break and it doesn't leak, I'm not going to touch it. It's part of the car's heritage, and I think it's kind of cool to have it there. So once I get it back together, running and, you know, driving, I'll take it for a test drive, find the next thing that's wrong with it. And that's how you fix these things, at least for me. I'm not, you know, Jay Leno. I don't have $1 million to throw at this thing. I'm doing it on a, you know, nickel and a dime and a water-cooled credit card to get it running. And for me, I drive them. So I also have a 1926 Model T truck that had sat for 10 years. I got it home, got it running, and I started driving it. And you'll find the problems with the vehicle. And as a problem comes up, you fix it. And then you drive it some more, and you move on to the next one, and the next one. And that's what I'm doing with this. You know, started driving it, found problems with the brakes. Drive it some more, you know, this problems, I knew it was there, but it really became a real issue. So I'm addressing it, and then we'll keep going. And once I've got it mechanically solid, running and driving, I'm going to, then I'll make it shiny and pretty and, you know, and stuff like that. Until then, it's pretty enough for me. I grew up, you know, a little kid. My first memory of antique cars was riding in this car. So it's pretty special. So I just wanted to share it. I'm not a, you know, a big YouTube presenter or anything like that. It's just a guy who likes old cars and wanted to share it with people of a similar mindset.